We're on day 3 of Irish Stew's Off the Beaten Craic and the Hidden Heartlands tour, and today we're going to be on the radio and at a farm with a few stops in between. And I'm John Lee.
And I'm Martin Nutty. This episode is made possible by our travel partner, Tourism Ireland, who helped us in so many ways, and they can help you with all your information and inspiration for your trip to Ireland. Just visit Ireland.com. So John, radio station, that's different. That's not a podcast studio, so talk to us.
Yeah, we got the word out to a few people we were visiting, and the great Midlands 103 took an interest in us. So our first stop was in Tullamore in County Offaly, where we visited the studio and sat down with ace broadcaster Sally Ann Barrett, and she asked us why we came to the Midlands, tell the listeners what we had seen so far, and what our plans for the rest of the trip were. It was a great way to really kick off day 3.
Yeah, and of course, day 3 was an Offaly day. The first 2 days we had spent actually in Athlone in Westmeath, and so now a different county. Following our trip to lovely folks at 103, we headed off to a place called Loch Bora.
Interesting spot. Really brings in the legacy of the bogs, the story of peat, and how they've taken this commercial peat operation and turned it into a natural space for walking, biking, and enjoying art on a monumental scale. Some of it made from the leftovers, the old machinery, the heritage and history of the time when that area was where the peat was harvested for fuel on a commercial scale.
So if you want to go visit a pyramid in Ireland, Loch Bora is one place where you can actually see one.
And you're advised not to climb, but there might be photo evidence of some visitors climbing the pyramid.
No comment. We will move on quickly from that. And our next stop, as we headed towards our recording session, we decided to take a side trip to a place called the Charleville Estate. And I think our listeners, who are also Netflix fans, may actually recognize this place.
Yeah, it's in the show Wednesday, which is a spinoff of the Addams Family. And boy, does this place reek of Addams Family. And it's interesting because there's a lot of film work and TV work that have been done in this beautiful estate, which is crumbling down in some areas and holding together pretty well in others. And there's little remnants of various productions that they're incorporating into the design, including some remnants from Wednesday.
Yeah, just an extraordinary space. And of course, if you have any interest in the supernatural, I can't imagine a much better place to stop off, but you got to go visit to find out the rather creepy ghost and tragic story that is associated with the castle.
Indeed. So then it's on to our destination for our interview, where we head off to meet 2 really dynamic women of agriculture in this area, particularly organic farming.
Yeah, we're delighted to visit Mount Briscoe Farm, where we sat down with Pippa Hackett. Pippa brings a wealth of policy knowledge based on her 5 years in government as Minister of State for Agriculture and as a member of the Green Party.
And hosting the session was Margaret Edgill, who is the proprietor of Mount Briscoe Farm, which has been in her family for generations. She moved back into the farming scene a little bit later in life. And for us, it was a great mix of organic farming. It's a resource for preserving rural traditions, and it's a memorable place to stay via Mount Briscoe Farm's B&B, Airbnb, and glamping options. So let's get out of the rain, sip a glass of cider, and join our guests in Mount Briscoe Farm kitchen.
Delighted to be joined by Pippa and Margaret and talk about agriculture in Offaly. So welcome to the Irish Stew podcast.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you for coming to rather wet County Offaly today, but yeah, it's great to have visitors to Offaly to hear all about what myself and Margaret are up to.
We welcome you, but you've been very welcoming to us, so we appreciate it. Let me start this way. Martin and I have, in the podcast, have had the opportunity to talk to some great chefs in Ireland, and including last night, the John Coffey at the Time restaurant in Athlone. Really an outstanding experience. And all these chefs are passionate about the local produce, the products of the local farmers. And as two of those local farmers working in an organic farming context, which seemed to be particularly appealing to these chefs, Ireland has a growing reputation now as a food destination, which it didn't previously have. How do you see your role as purveyors of high-quality food? How does that work fit into this growing perception of Ireland as a food destination?
I might start because Margaret's further along the supply chain than I am, because on our farm we're organic, it's beef and sheep we produce. But we invariably, once they leave our farm gate, that's, unless we keep one for ourselves, that's the last we have of them. But we get great pride in rearing the animals the way we do under organic principles. You know, we think about things about the soil health, how that improves the overall environmental health of our farm. And if you have a healthy environment and a healthy farm, you're going to have healthy animals and healthy food you produce at the end of the day. And that's important, not only from a chef perspective, but also, in my mind, from a human health perspective. So we feel very proud on our farm that we're doing what we can on our little area to produce the best quality food we can. And Margaret does the same, but so much more.
In my case, same scenario, like a beef producer. And in my case, I'm actually trying to do the direct business model for a limited amount of the produce that we have. And also, I suppose the expression I would use, to be of that place, to eat of that place, to actually experience it, and a very much a farm to fork experience. So in my case, I actually slaughter an animal, dry age that animal, and then we eat it. I invite an Argentinian chef, we cook that on a grill, and then we feed a party of 80 people. But that's what I do particularly here. And there's lots of other people doing similar things probably. And then I also make a range of artisan preserves and things.
So I got to roll things back a bit. Margaret, we're sitting in your lovely property in Mount Briscoe, and I understand your family has been on this property for a long time. Tell us a little bit about that.
Now we go back to the early 1500s. So you're now at Mount Briscoe, which is Daingean, County Offaly, and then 12 miles from us is a town called Tullamore. And close to that, there's a castle called Shra Castle. And that's where a man called John Briscoe built that castle with Eleanor Harney, married her, she was local. And that's where we originated from. So that's kind of 1500s. And the marriage stone from that castle is in this house.
Unlike Margaret, Pippa, you don't have deep roots in Offaly. I think you're from Mayo originally, as I understand. So how did you fetch up here?
I met my future husband at agricultural college in the UK 30 odd years ago. Well, I didn't come from a farming background, but I enjoyed outdoor things. I enjoyed the countryside, enjoyed nature, and ended up, as I said, doing an agriculture degree where I met my husband, and we came back together. I stayed on at college, but he's from this area and he grew up on a farm in this area, and, you know, we ended up getting married, and there you go. The rest is history, as they say, but it was fortuitous, just the way it happened. But yeah, I was delighted in a way to have the opportunity to then become a farmer and part of a farm and help run it and manage the land. It's a real blessing, really, yeah.
And I noticed you have a PhD in biomechanics with an equine concentration, which makes me think horses took a big part of your life at some point.
Yeah,
you know?
I always liked horses as well, and I suppose postgraduate studied them. I did a course in equine science, and then I did a PhD in biomechanics, which is essentially physics of motion. It's something about kinetics, and I don't quite use much of that really in my day-to-day nowadays, but we have a few horses as well on our farm that we enjoy. We have a few chickens as well, just for our own use, but it's nice to have a mix of species on your farm. You get so many farms now just have one monospecies, monoculture, and sadly I think it's fair to say modern agriculture has killed diversity really in all its forms, never mind biodiversity, diversity of what's produced now on farmsteads. So it's great, I think. I feel very privileged to live close to Margaret and see what she does and follow what she does, because it's really interesting. She has a number of events every year, different times of the year, Christmas, or one recently about hedgerows. And it's always interesting to meet the people who come and see what new things she's done.
I suppose Pippa and I'd wear the same hat. We're both very keen on biodiversity, keen on the environmental aspect, and actually really believe that good food is important for your diet. So it goes back to those basic principles. And I think once you're a farmer, you get up every day, you're curious about what the weather's going to be, what you're going to be able to do next week. And it's just part of who you are. And caring for nature, be it a cow, be it your horse, whatever it is, it's just, they come first every day. So I get up, do my herding. They simply are your priority. And be that veg, be that bees, whatever it is. If the harvest is now, the harvest is now. That's just the way it works. If the mare has to be covered, it all happens. In my case, in terms of tourism here, there's a disconnect. And I think that's the major thing, is that there's a disconnect. And that's what I find. I think it's fair to say that people don't know that a hazelnut that they eat in a packet actually comes from a tree that's in my orchard. Yeah. I think that's a fair observation. Or indeed that a wooden table, and I know this from experience, is that they don't know what wood is or timber is. And these are little kiddies. So I take pride in bringing them around the farm and introducing them to that because I grew up with it. And it's, to me, very natural to play on a tree or to have a swing or whatever it is, and then have a group of little girlies and bring them out and load them up in a jeep, drive them down the road, and just stuff, you know what I mean?
That's very true. Yeah, I think there is a disconnect. I don't know if it's an urban myth or not, but you ask kids in Germany what colour is a dairy cow, and they'll say it's purple because that's what milk, chocolate has the colour of the cow on the front of it. You sort of think, how could kids not know that? But if you've never really experienced it, we have still quite a high population of rural dwellers in Ireland, whereas in the rest of Europe anyway, it's very much a urban-centric focus on where people live. But even in Ireland, people used to be one generation from the farm, and now it's become two. And if you're coming back to the countryside and seeing where things come from and actually where things grow or how they grow, how would you know, really? I mean, you're not really taught it in school. You're taught very basic things.
No, I used to do a lecture in Tullamore. I had to go in and speak to school kids. That's a couple of years ago. And so I went in, spoke to them, and then they came out and did a day here. And they had only 2 in the class. And this is it's 12 miles down the road. And we're very rural here, but only 2 came from a farm.
Well, that's interesting to hear that it is a more rural population still in Ireland, but the trend is heading towards more urban. And it sounds like some of the work that both of you are doing are part of efforts to make the farm life more viable and vital, and maybe to attract more people and to protect the land from other kinds of development.
To be sustainable. Everybody needs to have a viable and sustainable farm. It's just I elect to do it in an organic fashion, as does Pippa. And that's just the hat that we wear. There's lots of people that do farming conventionally, or at the same game, but it just depends on what your mission is.
I think it's fair to say that, again, modern farming methods, and it's not actually that modern, it's maybe 50, 60 years old since the invention of pesticides and artificial fertilisers and that, and for generations before that, we're farming how farming was done. It's been superseded by what's been perceived as this great modern way of doing it, and it's progressive and everything, but I question if it is progressive, because we know the damage, not only in Ireland, but on a worldwide basis, that modern agriculture has done to the planet. Its water, its habitats, so much damage. And I think everyone accepts that, apart from very few people. But the continuation of that is not the way to go to produce food in a population that's growing, certainly isn't. So I think working with the natural processes and with nature and with ecology, for me, is a much more progressive way to do farming and agriculture than forcing it to be what it maybe doesn't want to be. Nature's going to win out.
I caught a little YouTube video of you speaking in some function, and you were talking about a field or a farmer who just decided not to use pesticides on his field. And the idea I ended up with, the field didn't look quite as pretty, but it was a healthier field as a result, and it was producing what it needed to produce without all the inputs of pesticides.
And sometimes land needs that period. You're not going to turn a field that has been maybe intensively managed with synthetic inputs into something that's very productive in a year or so. It might take a number of years, because the land has to adapt, the soil has to adapt, the microbiology in the soil has to adapt to this different way of being. But once it does, I mean, all the nutrients you need are either in the soil or in the air. And if you manage it properly, it does the work for you. And I think there's a great sort of magic in that. You actually have to do less work to get more. People will argue against that, say, no, that's not the way it works.
It strikes me that there's a pivot point here. My father worked in what is now Teagasc, And at that point in time, we started in the late 50s and early 60s, all the rage was synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, and this was the new modern way of farming. And indeed, it did drive incredible yields per acre. I'm talking now obviously about arable farming here, not about livestock. But is it reasonable to say that Ireland, if we waved our magic wand, thought experiment here, and said, okay, well, let's hand a decree down government now, we are going to ban all synthetic fertilizers, all pesticides. What would the impact be in terms of food production? And I know a lot of the food that's eaten in Ireland isn't actually from Ireland, right? So what are the implications there? If we think, yes, synthetic agriculture is problematic, it's not good for the environment, it's not good for people, it's not good for dietary reasons, but we've got 7 million people on this island right now. I understand actually food yields can actually be higher in organic farms, but the labor inputs are also higher. So
look, I think if something, as people might call it, draconian as that were to happen, I think you'd need a fairly long run in just to acclimatise everything and everyone to it. The argument I think you will get is Ireland exports 90% of the food it produces, and that's mainly dairy, beef, meat, that type of produce. Beef and dairy is a main element of it. And you're right, I think we eat everything in terms of imports. I think 60 or 70% of what we eat is imported. So we know we import huge quantities of vegetables and fruit and other meats and things we can't produce so well here. Because we're that export nation, it's the export drive. It's that element that drives what we do for agriculture here. Like other countries are more reliant on what they produce and don't have excess. Yes, they have a maybe local market. And if you were mainstream, mainland Europe, you'd probably have other countries around you. Because we're this little island and we can grow great grass and great crops when the weather's nice, we have this potential to feed that beast that is beef and dairy and create lots of produce to export. That's great because that's good for the economy, but it has been at a cost, really, unfortunately, to our country, to its nature and its habitats, and its water quality has been pretty poor for quite a while now. It gets better sometimes and then not so well, and that's the impact of it. So if you only ever want to focus on the economy, then keep doing what you're doing, really, because we don't really mind what happens the rest. But if you believe in a sort of a longer term future, I think, for the country and the land and the farmers, to be honest, because
I probably have a tiny bit of a difference. We're both going to come to the same place. But I think if you were to do what you're suggesting, which, is just cut it off here and now, that would be a huge shock to the system, is what you're saying. I personally think it would be a great thing to do, but it wouldn't be very well accepted. Because I think the potential from a tourism aspect to be a green island off the edge of Europe is just multifaceted. And if I was sitting in government, it would be absolutely what I think we should do. But it just wouldn't be necessarily bought in. There'd be a lot of, we can only call it what is a conventional farmer. They just go off scale and say we're totally nuts, because it'd be too big a change for them. But if they could only all sit around a table and actually think about the potential from a tourism aspect, the fact that everybody wants to de-stress. I know from my own guests, they all want to disconnect, to detox. So why not detox in an environment where A, we're green, B, we've got great food, and we really are that person, that we're really producing organic, amazing food. So I just think it has like massive potential if we had the foresight from the health department, the culture department, the tourism department, the Department of Agriculture, be it forestry, everybody, then that would be a phenomenal opportunity.
Are there incremental steps that would be very beneficial between farming on a large commercial scale and organic farming? Are there incremental steps towards a more sustainable agriculture that would also be of
I think
appeal?
we're all going to come to the same place. I think it's just a matter of time. There's the smart guys that are in dairy, that are doing mob grazing, that are actually still conventional, but that are adopting old-fashioned ways and traditional ways. I am a farmer, but I've come late to the table and I have no academic training, so I look at it perhaps in a different way. But the point being that I think you have a cohort that's organic, and then we have this new term called regenerative, and then we have the conventional guys. And I think they're all going to want to maximise their yield. And Pippa and I be on the same table on this, is that they can't keep doing what they're doing. We believe
Right.
I'm not a scientist, but we believe from the knowledge that we have is that they can't keep doing what they're doing and expect the soil to keep generating product. So therefore, we've elected to go down the organic route for a number of other reasons. And then there's the other guys that are doing the regenerative, whether it's in regenerative tourism or regenerative ag. And they'll all come together, I think.
I suppose the one thing that sort of protects, if you like, the organic piece is that it's certified. And in Europe, probably have the highest standards of organic. And the regenerative side is growing. That's where people are more focused on the soil health, and they can be arable farmers and livestock farmers. But it's a little bit blurry where the edges are. And there are some real die-hard ones who say absolutely no to any chemicals at all. And then there's others who use some because they're still in that transition, if you like. They might never become organic. They might. There's in fact some organic farmers that should use more regenerative practices on their farms. Not anyone at this table, of course, but there are ones who might just do the bare minimum to get that stamp of approval, but they're still ticking the boxes, but they could learn. So I think there's a lot of learning across the way, but I think if right is right, it will be more difficult to be a conventional farmer. We've seen a little bit of slippage in the last year or so in terms of policy from a European perspective. There's a lot of loud noises about where the money should be going. Now it's going more into defence and maybe less in agriculture, for example, and the focus might shift a little bit from that sort of that land piece. But in a way, that's the most important piece, what you do, how you manage your land. And if your soil isn't functioning, and we're lucky here in Ireland, our soil is pretty good, and you hear that all the time. Therefore, we've a free rein to do as we wish. But no, because it has declined in certain parts of the country. It is declining in quality, and the only way to restore that is to adopt practices that nurture it rather than the plants or the crops growing on top. And that's a different mindset for farmers to think about, feeding the soil rather than the crop or the grass.
So talk about that from a policy point of view. If we think soil is degrading, I'm assuming your 5 years in government, you met a certain degree of resistance or encountered resistance to encouraging people more and more to farm organically. You could make the case from a soil health point of view. You make a case in a lot of different ways, and people say, but what about pesticides or whatever? So where were the big fault lines in this situation?
I think some of them initially, because, and it's not to take from Irish agriculture in general, but our sort of food marketing board is called Board B, and it trades under a brand called Origin Green, that it puts all its food and produce in that. So any of the big sellers out of Ireland, they're trading with this stamp of approval from a state agency saying this is Origin Green approved. And that in its own right almost made the conventional side untouchable, because if you're saying Origin Green is not as good as, say, something like organic, you undermine this bigger sector by this little sector. There was always a bit of a difficulty there. But I tell you, one of the greatest challenges was helped, awfully ironically, by the invasion of Russia in the Ukraine, because that impacted energy costs, impacted grain availability, also impacted the cost of fertiliser. And actually that was a big shock, that economic shock to fertiliser prices in 2022 helped people think, because a lot of them cut back, a lot of farmers cut back maybe 20, 30, 40%, and the grass kept growing, and it was a big, how is this? And there was a worry then the next year it's not going to follow through, and there wasn't really. And then at the same time we had put in new payment rates for organic farmers to enable them to become organic. So there was a sort of a perfect storm in one sense that helped.
There was a drive from Europe as well.
Well, there was a push from Europe,
increase,
yes, definitely. The Europeans had pushed for more organic as well. But the fact that we'd gone into government and we'd wanted to go beyond some crazy figure we wanted to do, but we ended up settling on 7.5% of Irish land to get to organic by the end of the term of government. But then because you don't know when the government ends, that was changed about 1 or 2 years into government, that we went to 10% by 2030. That was to align with our climate plan. Law had been put in place during government. We'll see. The scheme reopens again. It's a scheme that opened every year, and farmers would join and they'd get payments, 2 years, sort of bigger payments for that trickier time, and then they'll get yearly payments after that.
I've already talked from a personal experience here. We don't have any inputs bar like an organic sludge that we put in. And so everybody else will be putting out their synthetic. And when I came home, Dad wasn't putting out any, he'd no inputs, okay? He probably had times of the year when he had less grass due to not having housing and all that kind of story. And So now all those neighbours are coming and looking over the field and going, gosh, that grass is very green. And it's down to managing the grass. And also, in our case now, we do have an input on the grazing land and stuff. But they know there's no cost to it. You know what I mean? And so it comes back to economics, which is what Pippa's saying, because you had COVID, then you had Ukraine, and then obviously the drive from Europe. And those three things together, the shock has hit them. It's cost them in their pocket. They're having to spend money, and my grass is still growing. She's not doing that. What can I learn from her? Like, they come up and they're at the gate. Any chance you can come to me?
Yeah, no, it is. And there was a drought in 2018 during the summer, and you drive around the country, and we were organic, you were organic, and it's sort of funny, the organic farms, they were still green.
I still had green.
Been round us, like even the same sort of land type and that, and we still had green as well, and maybe a few fields over, because they're growing different grasses. We have a mixture of multi-species now in our pastures, both of us, and you've different root lengths, and they draw up different nutrients and retain moisture or draw it when they need it. So again, from a policy perspective, we put in supports for farmers to sow. If they were happening to reseed a field or two, they could apply for a grant to get a multi-species seed mix rather than just a one or two ryegrass mix or something like this. So they're planting maybe 7 or 8 or 10 different species of grass when they sow. And again, you get that diversity in the crop, and those have different root lengths, and that supports that soil as well. So it's win-win, and farmers adopted that as well, which was good to see. But they found they needed less fertiliser.
The guys that are progressive and that are following the science and want to have a sustainable economic farm are going to adopt whatever it is going to reduce their costs, make their cattle thrive with the least amount of labour.
Yeah, and you're right. It's about reducing costs. Okay, you mightn't even care one bit about the nature or the environment or soil or any of that. But farmers can't really control what they get for their produce. They can only control what they do inside their farm gate. And that's one way of looking at it as well. If you can control your input costs and reduce those, and by the way, you're helping nature as well. But we might want to ram that bit down your throat, because people get a little bit, oh, you're saying the way I farm is damaging nature. And say, oh, no, we're not really. But
let's talk about the economics of running a farm in a different way. Margaret, you've diversified your income streams here by inviting people to come and stay here in various ways. I was trying to remember how I found my way to you at first. I think I looked up agritourism in the area, and I think that's how I found my way to you. So why don't you describe what you do here that is a draw for people to come and stay here, and how do they react once they get here?
Well, it's an organic farm. It's a Georgian house. Most of my market is North American. So I think that depth of heritage and just a peaceful, restful place. And so the sound bites that they seem to pick up on is that they've identified that it's organic. They've identified that there's farm animals. They want to engage with those, to talk to the horses, to pet the horses. They really want to get down and dirty with it. So yeah, obviously we do tourism and we produce food and stuff, but yeah.
And you have something a word I only recently became familiar with, glamping.
It's around a wee while. It's like posh camping, you know.
it's an experience you're coming for when you come to Margaret's place. And you get rain as well. And while we're sick to the back teeth of rain, we're like, oh, sometimes, you live in a dusty old city and it's wall to wall dry all year round, or in the summer's baking heat and you want to get out. You come to a nice rainy country like Ireland, people will want to walk in the rain and feel that rain, because if you don't feel it, and look, even today we're in October, it's pretty mild. I know we're on the brink of a bit of a storm, hopefully not too bad, but it's not cold and it's quite pleasant. If you're not used to the rain, it's fabulous.
There's a trend towards cool tourism.
Well, there you go, I'd say so. A lot of the hot countries are too hot now during the summer months. People are going in the shoulders of the year and...
Oh, I had Nevada and places like that and Texas, and they want to come. There's something about that thing about knowing what Ireland is about, that kind of welcome, that hospitality. When they come to me, their particular example is that they simply want to detox. They have absolutely no care for the fact that it's a damp day or not a damp day. They're actually disappointed if it's warm. They don't want it to be warm. And if they're from somewhere more northern, they just want to spend time in the heritage of the farm and to actually engage and talk. I have guests, I thought they would have missed the plane in last time. Oh, for out so long talking to the horses, And it was great. It's lovely. It's lovely to see. It's lovely to photograph them with them.
It's honest. This is your life.
Yeah.
It's not as if it's a petting zoo and we just
exactly.
doing this is you. Yeah. You live here every day and
Yeah.
people work here and In fact, when you look out the window there, you'll see some of actually the history of the Midlands, the industrial heritage of the peat extracted areas, and now they're re-wetting those. And there's such a wide array of stuff to learn and understand here. It's great, yeah.
Let me take another angle or another cut at the economic question. How big in this part of the world does a farm have to be economically viable? What does it take? Like, Margaret, you've combined ecotourism with farming. Is this farm big enough just to be a farm without the ecotourism? Or, Pippa, you're just purely farming, as I understand it. What's the scale you need to be at to be viable and have a life that is comfortable and fulfilling, etc.?
Depends what you produce. If you can add as much value as you can function off a smaller area. And if you produce something like, say, organic vegetables, maybe only working off a few hectares, and you could employ 6 or 7 people, but it's labour intensive, but you're producing great food, and that's potentially viable. It's harder with livestock because the price isn't there. And I think what Margaret's doing by adding value, by producing her own and direct, if you like, selling that to consumers and adding the agrotourism, probably helps no end on that. I mean, our farm as it stands wouldn't support us at 4 kids, not a chance. While it would be wonderful in a utopian world for farms to support families like they used to 100 years ago in Ireland, that's just not the case anymore. It might work for dairy farmers, it'll work because you're producing a high quality, and you can put high inputs into that as well, and the current regulations allow you to carry more stock than ordinarily would be allowed, so it makes your farm more profitable. But I think for ordinary and even organic beef and sheep and tillage farmers, it's hard to be a full-time farmer, as they call it. I mean, there's only maybe 20% of farmers in Ireland are classified as full-time. The rest are, thank goodness, they used to use this dreadful term called hobby farmers, which I thought was the most insulting thing, because you're still a land manager, you're still managing your farm, you're still producing food. So they don't use that anymore. So now you're like a part-time farmer or something like that. But I think if you can instill the love of having the land and nurturing the land, and look, if you have to get another job, which most people do who farm, so be it. Doesn't mean you're any less the farmer. There was a bit of a stigma, I think, there for a while that you were some sort of less farmer if you weren't full-time. But I could be a full-time farmer, but I'd be a busy fool and I wouldn't be earning enough for my family and so forth. So I think accepting and actually appreciating, because the land is only a finite amount of land. And if you love that, if you love the idea of farming, it's a way of life. And if you can make the books balance and have some extra, that's pretty good, because the average farmer in this country, beef and sheep farmer, is losing money from their production model. They're propped up by the subsidies, the EU subsidies. So they keep them afloat. There's an expression that goes around: for every €1 of EU money that goes into agriculture, I think it's across Europe, we'll just say Ireland, it generates €4 for the wider economy, which is great, sounds great. I'm not against all that, but the farmer does well to hold on to about 70 cents of that €1. So the money's been filtered through, the farmers magically made this wonderful, so the economy is doing well off the back of farming. But my passion would be what the farmer is doing first and foremost, because they are the food producer. They should be making that €1 into 4 and keeping 2. That would be a fairer cut off it. But that's the model that's been derived. And again, it comes from the export drive, because if we can produce more food and export it more, somebody further along the supply chain is going to make more of the money, because the farmer sure ain't.
You mentioned supply chain. I was watching a YouTube video, and it was somebody going into one of the supermarkets, and he's looking at the produce. He goes, okay, pineapples, we don't grow pineapples in Ireland. That's fine. Okay, there's some other more exotic fruit. Okay, we don't have that in Ireland. Then he gets the apples. These are from Chile. This other variety, this is from South Africa. It's apple season in Ireland. Why aren't there Irish apples in here?
Yeah, it's a sad reality. If you're a commercial apple grower, it's very hard to compete. That's why there's so few of them. We don't subsidise horticulture in the same way as we subsidise beef and sheep in Ireland, or livestock agriculture. They don't get like a single farm payment. They don't get a direct payment from the EU. They can apply for a few grants here and there for polytunnel, or to buy a piece of equipment that picks carrots or apples, or what it might well be, I don't know. But while it gets some supports, it doesn't get the same level And you're pretty much only going to see Irish beef usually for sale in Ireland because we've so much of the stuff. Or lamb, maybe occasionally see New Zealand lamb frozen and things like that. But apples and onions and carrots and broccoli and things we can grow quite well here. There's only a handful of growers really now. You have to have a system that relies on subsidies. That's pretty sad. But when you're part of the single market of the EU, we can't say to a supermarket chain, hey, you guys better just sell Irish stuff. That breaks the rules. So it's one of the disadvantages maybe of a single market, but I suppose it comes with other advantages, yeah.
But the other side is maybe different channels, okay? So if you're dealing with, let's say, the Tesco's of the world, they have a huge requirement, which probably taps into monocrop growers. But there are other channels. So, for example, New York City, where we are, we have farmers markets where all sorts of oddities grown, heritage type food, to the point where now I will not buy tomatoes in a grocery store because compared to what I can get in tomato season out in New York, it's just a different animal altogether, and I've no patience for anything else. So I'm just curious, in this immediate area, do you have a farmer's market? Do you have a direct to customer situation?
Yeah, we have a farmers market in Tullamore. To me, it's 12 miles. That's our capital town, really, in the county. Yeah, so
it's on a Saturday morning, 2 or 3 hours on Saturday morning. It's grown, actually. COVID shot it up into the stratosphere as one of those fortunate indoor/outdoor businesses that could stay open during COVID, and it really helped it along no end. We're not brilliant in Ireland at municipal markets. Is your market, for example, in New York, the one you go to, is it open every day?
No, this will be just one day on the weekend.
It's one day. It's a Saturday over here. It's a Sunday
it moves
over
in.
here.
Yeah,
it's
so
a Tuesday
it's
over
somewhere
there.
in New York every day then. Yeah, well, that's good. Yeah, and you see it a lot on the continent, markets every day somewhere, even on little islands.
I actually do think it's the economical wealth of the consumer. I think it's down to education. I think it's a load of things. It's a choice to the mummy that has 2 kids, 3 kids, whatever it is. But I think if you have a more mature urban area, you will have more demand for those markets. And I just know by the people that are coming to me, the guests that are staying, we can preach the song of like local and seasonal, and that's very much my mantra. And if we could move that, but then there's the question, can we feed the world?
I don't buy into that whole feed the world. There was an article there in last month or the month before, one of the New Scientist journal, and it basically said that in 2020 the world produced more than enough food. It's all about the waste and it's the distribution and where it's produced. And in fact, most of the world's food is produced by smallholders. You look across Africa and Asia, the smallholders, actually they're usually women, handful of cows, a little bit of this, a little patch of that, and they're feeding people in their own local areas, and that's how we really should be supporting feeding the world. It's not here, let's get North America to grow a bit more grain.
Yeah, but that's what I was saying. We need consumers to make that choice.
I suppose, look, we can't impact consumer choices in different parts of the world, but at least if our own Irish consumers or Offaly consumers would reach out, and they are, but when they've only got one maybe decent market in the whole county, you don't get that choice. I mean, years ago you did, because every village in town had a greengrocer and a butcher and maybe a dairy. You had such access to local food in my childhood. And that's all but gone. You don't have local abattoirs hardly anymore. People have to drive God knows where. If they wanted to slaughter an animal locally, it's very difficult to get done. The milk sector's been centralised, so you've got big co-ops who take the milk in. And I don't think you can reverse engineer out of that. You almost have to try and create a new way of selling food. But at the end of the day, it'll come down to the farmers to come together, and that's where farmers' markets come from. They're saying, God, let's try and sell more to our local people.
And but your question was, my farm sustainable? My farm wouldn't be sustainable without having the agritourism element and all the other aspects. So it's a mixed micro enterprise business, which interests me on a personal level. But for the farm to survive, that's what it would have to do. It couldn't otherwise.
Well, the limitations of our little machine here dictate that we're going to have to wrap this thing up when we're only just really getting going. And let's leave with our Seamus plug segment. What should our listeners know more about? Margaret, you've got some stuff to plug here.
So it's Mount Briscoe Organic Farm in a little place called County Offaly in Ireland, mountbriscoe.ie. and it's just really good for come and chill, enjoy.
And we talked a lot about food production and methods of food production, but there's the theme of the farming life culture and the heritage. You've used that word several times because I know you have events that happen here that really help preserve the heritage of the farming life in this area. So I congratulate you for that. And in our brief visit, we hope to come back as paying customers someday.
Well, I'm going to plug Margaret's Mount Briscoe as well, because it just really is an active farm and it has the history, it has the heritage. You have a real live farmer in Margaret who will treat you to just amazing experience here in the middle of Ireland, really miles from anywhere, which is bliss, isn't it, really?
If you want to kind of find an unknown gem, then that's it. And this whole area is that.
We found it.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
So with that, on behalf of our listeners and John and myself, I would like to thank both Pippa and Margaret for giving us great insight into the farming experience in the heartland of Ireland, and can't recommend enough how beautiful this place is. So thank you, and thank you for your hospitality.
Thank you, it's been brilliant.
So great insight there, John, into the world of organic farming in the Midlands, and what a beautifully quiet place Mount Briscoe is.
Love to get a chance to stay there sometime. And next time we stay in Offaly and we stay with the bog theme. Actually, we're going to be about knee deep in the bogs as we take a look at a farm that is experimenting with a program called Peatlands for Prosperity. So come back and listen to us then.
So please do join us for some fascinating insight into that particular space. And also, please visit irishstewpodcast.com. You can sign up there for our newsletter, or you can view each individual episode that we have published so far, which is, I think, 137 at this point in time. On each of the episodes from our Midlands trips, we're actually posting additional pictures on the episode page. So make sure you check that out.
And we thank you for listening and for subscribing and for commenting and for following us on social media. And we thank our travel partner, Tourism Ireland, and their colleagues at Fáilte Ireland, and also our media partner, Irish Central, for giving Irish Stew marquee billing on the world's global Irish news site. That's irishcentral.com.
And so until the next time, this has been the Irish Stew Podcast, Off the Beaten Craic. Irish Stew is produced by John Lee, Martin Nutty, and Bill Schultz. Editing, mixing, and mastering by Bill Schultz. Music on Irish Stew was composed and performed by Rosa Nutty, with Donald Bowens on drums, Cathal O'Riordan on bass and synthesizer. For more on Rosa Nutty's music, please visit rosanutty.com.